I've told myself 100 times that if I ever wrote this down, it would be to get it out of my head, not to justify it, not to brag, and definitely not to ask for absolution from strangers on the internet. But here I am, posting in a confession-style thread at 2:14 a.m., wide awake again, because some deals don't stay buried no matter how deep you shove them. My name's William. I'm not proud of most of the things I've done, but there's one job, the job, that still wakes me up with my jaw clenched and my heart racing. It wasn't my first crime, and it wasn't even the one that made me the most money. But it was the one that crossed a line I didn't even know I had back then. This is about illegal arms sales. Not the Hollywood version with tuxedos and martinis, but the grimy, gray-area reality that starts with rationalizations and ends with consequences you can't unsee. At the time, I was in my early 30s, already comfortable bending rules for a living. I told myself I was a middleman, a logistics guy, someone who connected dots. That's how it always starts, language that sands down the sharp edges. I wasn't pulling triggers, I wasn't starting wars, I was just moving objects from point A to point B. At least that's what I told myself when I still wanted to sleep at night. The motive was simple and boring, money, mixed with ego. I wanted to feel untouchable. I wanted to prove to myself that I was smarter than the system, that laws were just puzzles for people like me to solve sideways. And when the opportunity came, quietly, through someone I trusted more than I should have, I didn't see it as a moral crossroads. I saw it as a test of competence. The circumstances mattered too. I was recently divorced, cash poor but pride-rich, angry at the world in that low, simmering way that makes bad ideas feel righteous. When someone suggested there was a deal that needed discretion and nerve, I heard validation, not warning bells. I didn't know then that this would be the one story I'd never be able to tell at a dinner table. I just knew it felt like a door opening, and I stepped through before asking what was on the other side. What scares me now isn't how fast I said yes, it's how reasonable everything sounded once I did. The guy who brought it to me didn't pitch it like a crime. He framed it like a favor wrapped in opportunity. Short-term logistics problem, he said. You're good at those. I like that. Being good at something has a way of dulling your instincts. I spent a week telling myself I was evaluating risk, but really I was just rehearsing excuses. No names, no politics, no faces, just crates and paperwork and a payoff that would wipe out my debts and then some. I told myself that if I didn't do it, someone else would. That line is dangerously comforting. It turns responsibility into background noise. Preparation started small. Phone calls that sounded like nothing. Notes I memorized and burned. I paid attention to patterns, who talked too much, who avoided details. I convinced myself that caution equaled morality, that being careful somehow made me less guilty. By the end of that week, the idea of backing out felt more reckless than going through with it. That's how the trap closes, quietly, politely, while you nod along. Once I committed, my brain flipped into a mode I recognize too well now, problem-solving without ethics. I didn't think in terms of right or wrong anymore, just friction and flow. What could slow things down? Who could ask questions, where mistakes usually happened? I told myself this was professionalism, not obsession. I created distance wherever I could. I didn't ask where the weapons were going, just where they weren't supposed to be seen. I avoided specifics the way a superstitious person avoids saying a curse out loud. If I didn't picture the end user, then the end user couldn't haunt me. That was the theory, anyway. I slept poorly but worked efficiently. I triple-checked documents I barely read for meaning. I trusted systems more than people, because systems don't judge you. Every precaution I took felt like proof I was in control, that I wasn't reckless like the people who get caught. What I didn't plan for was how planning itself changes you. The more time I spent smoothing the path, the less space there was for doubt to stand upright. The week before everything went down felt stretched thin, like time was being pulled instead of passing. I moved through my days on autopilot, groceries, emails, small talk, while my head lived somewhere else entirely. Preparation became ritual. Wake up, review routes. Coffee, check burner phones. Sleep, if you could call it that. I mapped redundancies the way other people plan vacations. If this checkpoint failed, there was another. If that contact disappeared, I had a fallback. I paid extra for silence, drivers who didn't ask questions, storage that didn't keep records. Money flowed out fast, but that felt reassuring. Expensive plans feel safer, even when they're illegal. I remember standing in my kitchen labeling envelopes with cash, hands steady, thinking how absurdly calm I felt. That scared me more than the risk. I wasn't nervous, I was focused. Like I'd done this my whole life, even though I hadn't. The night before, I almost backed out. Almost. But momentum has weight, and I let it carry me forward. The moment it stopped being abstract was when I saw the crates in person. Not on paper, not implied, there. Wood scuffed at the corners, metal strapping biting into it like teeth marks. They weren't labeled with anything incriminating, but they didn't need to be. Weight tells its own story. We met at a warehouse that smelled like oil and damp concrete. Nobody used real names. Nobody shook hands. It was all nods and distances, like we were allergic to each other. I kept my voice neutral, almost bored, because confidence is contagious in places like that. If you act like this is routine, people assume it is. There was a moment, brief, unwelcome, when one of the guys cracked a crate to check contents. I didn't look for long, but long enough. That image stuck harder than I expected. Steel isn't neutral when it's shaped for harm. The trucks rolled out smoother than planned. No alarms, no surprises. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like crossing a line you can't step back over, even if no one saw you do it. I'd love to say that was it, that everything went clean and quiet, and I just collected my money and disappeared into the background. That's not how it works. There's always a wrinkle. Ours showed up about 3 hours after the trucks left. One of the drivers missed a check-in window. 10 minutes turned into 20, then 30. I stared at my phone like it had personally betrayed me. My mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. Pulled over, searched, flipped. Every contingency I'd planned suddenly felt flimsy. When he finally called, his voice was too casual. That was the red flag. He said there was a delay. Nothing more. I pushed for details and got static answers. Not lies, exactly, just evasions. I remember pacing a parking lot, rehearsing what I'd say if this unraveled. Who I'd blame. How I'd disappear. It turned out to be a breakdown. Mechanical. Boring. But that half hour did something to me. It showed me how little control I actually had once things were in motion, and how many people could ruin my life without even meaning to. After the breakdown scare, I stopped pretending I was just a coordinator. I was invested now, emotionally, physically. Every mile those trucks traveled felt like it registered somewhere in my body. Jaw tight. Shoulders up. Like I was bracing for impact that never quite came. I followed progress indirectly. No GPS, no real-time feeds, just staggered check-ins and coded confirmations. Listening to other people describe my plan unfolding was surreal. They talked about traffic, weather, fuel stops. Mundane details layered over something fundamentally ugly. That contrast messed with me more than I expected. One guy joked over the line. Nothing explicit, just enough to remind me that for him this was a paycheck and a story to tell later. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. It hit me then that once you outsource the risk, you also outsource the conscience. These weren't my hands on the crates anymore, but the responsibility didn't evaporate just because I wasn't there. I started wondering who would be holding these weapons next. That question didn't have a comforting answer, so I tried to drown it out with logistics. The money hit before the job was officially done, which should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt backwards, like being paid for a sin you hadn't finished committing yet. I watched the numbers settle into the account, clean, quiet, perfectly legal-looking, and felt absolutely nothing for about 5 seconds. Then the nausea showed up. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I just stared at the screen, thinking about how absurd it was that this part was the smoothest. No questions from the bank. No red flags. Just confirmation emails and a balance that changed my immediate future. That's the part nobody warns you about, how easily the world accepts dirty money if you dress it correctly. I moved it fast, split it up, did all the things I'd practiced in theory. My hands shook for the first time since this started. Not from fear of getting caught, from the realization that I could walk away right now and no one would stop me. But the trucks were still rolling. The story wasn't finished. And neither was the damage, even if I already had my cut. The call came late, which is always a bad sign. Not emergency late, just late enough to mean someone had been debating whether to make it. I answered on the second ring, already standing, like my body knew before my brain caught up. It wasn't law enforcement. Worse, it was one of the secondary contacts, someone who was never supposed to talk to me directly. His voice was tight, stripped of the casual tone everyone else had used. He said there'd been a situation at one of the transfer points. No arrests. No weapons seized. Just attention. The wrong kind. Apparently a local crew had shown up early, uninvited, asking questions they shouldn't have known to ask. Nothing exploded, nothing escalated, but suddenly there were too many eyes on a place designed to be invisible. I told him to shut it down, reroute, delay, words spilling out faster than I could organize them. He listened, then said something that stuck with me. "This isn't clean anymore." That sentence echoed long after the call ended. Because he was right, and because deep down, it never was, once something is not clean anymore. Every decision feels like the wrong one. Move too fast, you draw attention. Freeze up, and you let other people decide your fate for you. I spent the next 12 hours bouncing between burner phones, running damage control with half answers and forced calm. Plans I'd been so proud of started collapsing under real pressure. Routes overlapped in ways I hadn't noticed. Two people who were never supposed to know about each other suddenly did. I caught myself snapping at someone over nothing, and immediately apologized, not out of kindness, but because I needed them cooperative, not offended. The worst part was the waiting. No sirens, no knocks, just the hum of possibility. I barely ate. I kept the TV on low for background noise, like that could anchor me to normal life. Every unfamiliar car outside made my stomach drop. I remember thinking, this is the price. Not prison, not headlines, this suspended state where your life is technically intact, but no longer feels like it belongs to you. It came closest to ending the next morning. Not with flashing lights or a door kicked in, but with a knock that was just polite enough to be terrifying. 3 taps. Measured. Patient. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, convinced that if I didn't move, time might reset itself. It was a neighbor. Wrong apartment. Simple mistake. I smiled, gave directions, closed the door, and slid down against it like my legs had finally gotten permission to quit. That's when I realized how far gone I was. An innocent knock had reduced me to something small and fragile. Later that day, I met one of the contacts face to face. That wasn't supposed to happen either. He wanted reassurance. I wanted distance. We sat across from each other, both pretending this was still business. He asked if I'd accounted for everything. I said yes, because saying no would have been an invitation to dig. We parted without incident, but the message was clear: control was slipping. And everyone could feel it. That night, I did something I'm not proud of, but I'm trying to be honest here. I rewrote the story in my head until it fit better. I told myself this wasn't my chaos anymore. The crates were out of my hands. The decisions belonged to other people now. I was just a chapter, not the ending. I poured a drink I didn't want and sipped it anyway, like punishment. I listed reasons this wasn't as bad as it felt. No one was hurt yet. Nothing had exploded. I hadn't chosen targets or sides. I clung to technicalities the way drowning people cling to debris. Sleep came in fragments. Every time I drifted off, my brain replayed conversations with different endings. Ones where I said no, ones where I walked away earlier, ones where I never took the call. I woke up sweating, heart racing, already exhausted. That's when the guilt really settled in. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. The kind that doesn't accuse you. It just waits, confident you'll eventually understand exactly what you've done. A few days later, confirmation came through that the transfer had completed. No drama. No fallout. On paper, it was a success. That should have been the end of it. Instead, that's when the weight really dropped. I ran into one of the drivers by accident weeks later, pure coincidence, different part of town. He didn't recognize me at first. When he did, his expression shifted, like he just remembered something unpleasant but unavoidable. We exchanged a few harmless sentences. Weather. Work. Nothing of substance. But his hands shook when he lit a cigarette. He mentioned casually that he'd quit that line of work. Said his partner couldn't sleep anymore. Nightmares. He laughed it off like it was nothing, but his eyes didn't match the sound. That was the moment it stopped being theoretical. I went home and scrubbed my hands in the sink until the water ran cold. I hadn't fired a shot. I hadn't even touched the weapons. And still, something I set in motion had already started bleeding into other people's lives. That realization stuck harder than fear ever did. Time didn't fix it. That surprised me. I always thought guilt faded the way adrenaline does, sharp at first, then dull, then gone. This didn't. It just changed shape. Some days it was loud, sitting on my chest the moment I woke up. Other days it hid in the background, surfacing at random, a news clip muted on a bar TV, a siren 3 blocks away, the smell of oil on concrete. I didn't get caught. That's the part people expect next, the moral bookkeeping of consequences. Legally, nothing happened. Socially, I blended back in. But internally, something shifted and never slid back into place. I started measuring myself differently. Not by what I could get away with, but by what I now knew I was capable of. I stopped chasing bigger risks after that. Not out of growth, out of fear of repetition. Because the worst part wasn't the danger. It was realizing how easily I could talk myself into doing it again if the numbers looked right and the language stayed vague. That scared me more than prison ever did. So that's the story I don't usually tell. Not because it's the most dramatic thing I've done, but because it's the one that stripped away my favorite illusion, that intelligence or planning somehow insulates you from moral fallout. It doesn't. It just delays it. If there's anything I learned, it's this. The most dangerous part of crossing a line is how ordinary it feels once you're on the other side. There's no lightning strike, no instant punishment. Just a quiet adjustment where you start carrying something extra everywhere, whether you admit it or not. I'm not posting this to scare anyone straight or pretend I found redemption. I didn't. I'm still me. But if you're reading this while rationalizing something you know is wrong, telling yourself you're just a cog, just a facilitator, just temporary, pause. That story is a trap. It makes consequences someone else's problem until they aren't. Some deals pay in cash. Others pay in sleep. This one cost me the ability to believe my own excuses. If you still can walk away, do it. Momentum is heavy, but regret is heavier, and it lasts longer.